There's a moment when everything you've believed about your life, your place in it, the nature of your relationships, the very fabric of your reality, suddenly unravels. For some, this realization arrives like thunder, a devastating crash that leaves nothing intact. For others, like me, it seeps in slowly, a quiet poison working its way through years of memories, recoloring them one by one until the portrait of your past becomes unrecognizable. My moment began with a word, exotic. Such a harmless word on the surface. 5 letters that somehow contained worlds of meaning I was too young, too eager to belong, to fully comprehend. When Eliza's parents first used it to describe me at their dinner table during my sophomore year of high school, I smiled politely, even felt a flutter of pride. It sounded special, distinctive. Different, yes, but in a way that seemed valued. What I didn't understand then was that words can be prisons. Some are built brick by brick over decades, their walls so familiar we forget they're there at all. It would take me 15 years to find the key that unlocked the true meaning behind that seemingly innocuous compliment, and to understand why, after that summer, the invitations to their lakeside estate abruptly stopped. By then, it was far too late to undo what had been set in motion. Far too late to save any of us from what was coming. Exotic, Mrs. Whitman had said, reaching across her immaculate dining table to touch my wrist. Her diamond tennis bracelet caught the light from the chandelier above us. You have such exotic features, Maya. Those cheekbones, those eyes. Where did you say your parents were from, originally? The question hung in the air like the crystal chandelier above us, delicate, expensive, and potentially dangerous if it came crashing down. I was 16, sitting at a table worth more than my mother's car, wearing a borrowed dress because Eliza had insisted my clothes weren't right for dinner with her parents. My father is from Chennai, in South India, I said carefully. My mother is from here, Minnesota. Fascinating, Mr. Whitman said, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. That explains it. I wanted to ask what it was exactly, but Eliza kicked me gently under the table, our prearranged signal when I was veering into territory she deemed unsafe. So instead, I smiled and took a small bite of the undercooked beef I'd been too intimidated to ask them to cook longer. It was the spring of 2008, and Eliza Whitman had been my best friend for precisely 7 months. We'd been paired as lab partners in AP chemistry, and despite all the reasons our friendship shouldn't have worked, her family's wealth versus my single mother's perpetual financial struggles, the sprawling mansion where she lived versus our 2-bedroom apartment, her effortless social dominance versus my careful invisibility, something had clicked between us. They liked you, Eliza said later, as her driver took us back to my apartment. She was scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by its blue glow in the backseat darkness. Mom never compliments anyone. Being called exotic is a compliment? I asked, unsure. Eliza looked up from her phone. Of course it is. It means you're interesting. Different. Not like everyone else around here. She returned to her scrolling. Anyway, I told you they would. That's why I invited you for dinner first, before asking about the lake house. The lake house. For 2 months, Eliza had been telling me stories about her family's summer estate on Lake Minnetonka. The private dock, the boathouse with 3 vintage wooden boats, the summer parties where Minnesota's elite gathered to network and relax. It had seemed like a world from a movie, not somewhere I would ever set foot. They want you to come with us this summer, she continued casually. 2 full weeks in June. Mom already spoke to your mother about it. My heart leapt. She did? When? When she called about the scholarship recommendation. Another piece of Eliza's inexplicable generosity. Somehow, she convinced her mother, a board member at the prestigious Lakeside Academy, to recommend me for their full-ride academic scholarship for the coming year. If I received it, I wouldn't have to attend the overcrowded public high school across town for junior year. I could stay with Eliza. Do you think your mom will let you come? Eliza asked, finally looking up. I thought about my mother's extra shifts at the hospital, how exhausted she looked when she came home, how she still found time to quiz me on vocabulary and check my math homework, how she'd carefully maintained our middle-class stability after my father left when I was 7, returning to India without a backward glance. I don't know, I said honestly. 2 weeks is a long time. We'll convince her, Eliza said with the easy confidence of someone who had never been denied anything important. Trust me. I did trust her. That was my first mistake. 3 months later, I stood on the curved driveway of the Whitman's lake house. Though house was a spectacular understatement. 3 stories of weathered gray shingles and white trim sprawled along the lakeshore, with multiple gabled roofs, and a wraparound porch lined with white rocking chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the sparkling blue water of Lake Minnetonka. Several outbuildings, a guest house, a boathouse, something that might have been a private sauna, dotted the perfectly landscaped 5-acre property. This is where my great-grandfather built the summer home in 1918, Eliza explained as we crunched across the gravel drive. The east wing was added in the 60s. I nodded, clutching my second-hand duffel bag, suddenly aware of its fraying strap and scuffed bottom. Eliza's chrome luggage had already been whisked away by the caretaker, a silent man named Henrik who'd barely glanced at me. Your room is next to mine in the north wing, Eliza continued. Best view of the sunrise over the lake. I followed her up the wide front steps, trying to appear nonchalant, as though I regularly visited historic mansions. Inside, the vaulted entryway opened to a great room with exposed beams and a stone fireplace you could stand inside. Everywhere I looked, I saw a wealth cushioned by age, antique furniture that wasn't meant to impress, but had simply been in the family for generations, oriental rugs worn to buttery softness by decades of footsteps, oil paintings in heavy gilt frames that I would later learn were originals by artists whose works hung in museums. Darling, you're here. Mrs. Whitman descended a curved staircase, looking like she'd stepped from the pages of a Ralph Lauren advertisement in crisp white linen pants and a navy blouse. She air-kissed Eliza's cheeks before turning to me. And Maya, welcome to Lake Shadows. Thank you for having me, Mrs. Whitman, I said, the rehearsed words feeling wooden in my mouth. Catherine, please, she insisted with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. We're informal here. Eliza, show Maya to the blue room. I've had Henrik move some of the items from in there to make space for her things. As we climbed the stairs, I wondered what items had needed removing for my arrival. But Eliza was already chattering about the afternoon's plans, swimming off the private dock, introducing me to the neighbor's son who had a speedboat, dinner on the porch as the sun set over the water. The blue room was larger than our entire apartment living room, with a 4-poster bed and French doors opening onto a private balcony overlooking the lake. I set my duffel on a needlepoint bench at the foot of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of 2 weeks in this alternate universe. Bathrooms through there, Eliza said, pointing. We share with no one. Dad and Mother have their own wing. It's beautiful, I managed. It's home, she shrugged, as though everyone had a second home worth millions. Get changed. I want to swim before the Prestons arrive for cocktails. When she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, running my hand over the crisp white duvet. On the nightstand was a silver-framed photograph of a young woman in 1920s clothing, standing proudly beside a gleaming wooden boat. She was beautiful in a sharp, aristocratic way that reminded me of Eliza. I changed into my one-piece swimsuit, covering it with the new sundress my mother had insisted on buying me despite its cost. You can't go to Lake Minnetonka looking like you shop at Target, she'd said firmly, though that was precisely where we'd always shopped. On the balcony, I looked out over the glittering water, the manicured lawn sloping down to a private beach, the boathouse where 3 wooden Chris-Craft boats gleamed in the sunlight. In the distance, other estates lined the shore, equally impressive. I took a deep breath of the clean, pine-scented air and tried to quell the nagging feeling that I was a fraud who would inevitably be exposed. I couldn't have known then how right that feeling was, or that my exposure would come through channels I couldn't possibly have anticipated. The next week unfolded like a dream, the kind where everything is beautiful but slightly off-kilter. I learned to water ski behind the Preston speedboat, received tennis lessons from Eliza's cousin Thomas, who attended Princeton and made sure everyone knew it, and ate meals prepared by the Whitman's cook, whose name I never learned because Catherine referred to her only as the help. Each evening, the adults gathered for cocktails on the porch while we teenagers were sent to the boathouse or the beach. The rhythm of wealthy summer life was seductive. No one seemed to worry about money or time. Conversation flowed as freely as the expensive wine, and beneath it all ran a current of absolute certainty that this was how life was meant to be lived. You're fitting in beautifully, Catherine told me on the 5th night, as I helped her arrange flowers for the dinner table. She'd taken to assigning me small tasks, which Eliza said was a sign of approval. Some of our guests have trouble adapting to our ways. It's not hard to adapt to paradise, I said, earning a tight smile. Indeed. Though, of course, it takes generations to truly belong in a place like this, she continued, snipping a rose stem with silver shears. Eliza's great-grandmother helped establish the Lake Society as we know it today. There's a certain continuity that matters. I nodded, uncertain how to respond to the subtle reminder of my outsider status. That's why we value the scholarship program so much, she added. It allows promising young people exposure to different opportunities. I'm very grateful, I said automatically. If I get the scholarship. Oh, you will? She interrupted with a dismissive wave. The committee has already made its decision. We're just waiting for the formal announcement. My heart leapt. Really? I'm going to Lakeside Academy? Pending the formal process, yes. She arranged another rose in the crystal vase. Eliza speaks very highly of your academic abilities. And of course, we're always looking to increase our diversity metrics. The pause before diversity was barely perceptible, but it landed like a pebble in still water, sending ripples through my understanding of the situation. Before I could process it, however, Mr. Whitman appeared in the doorway. Catherine, the Hendersons are here early. Something about beating the traffic. He nodded at me. Maya. In the year I'd known Eliza, her father had never said more than 10 words directly to me. He moved through spaces as though everyone in them were furniture, his attention reserved for matters I couldn't fathom. Later, I would understand this as the ultimate privilege, the ability to remain totally uninterested in those deemed beneath your station. That night, as guests filled the porch and lawn, I found myself drifting between conversations, smiling politely as people spoke around and through me. I caught fragments, stock portfolios, boarding school gossip, political connections that revealed the intricate network undergirding their casual summer gathering. Eliza's charity case, I overheard someone whisper as I passed the drinks table. The scholarship girl. I froze, my back to the speakers. Generous of Catherine, another voice replied. Though I suspect it's more about the diversity statistics for the Academy's donor report. She's quite striking, I'll give her that. Exotic. That word again, floating like a feather on the evening breeze. I should have grabbed it then, held it up to the light, examined its sharp edges. Instead, I let it drift away, focusing instead on the fact that I had secured the scholarship, my ticket to a better education, a better future. Later that night, Eliza and I sat on my balcony, sharing a cigarette she'd stolen from her cousin Thomas. The lake was dark except for the running lights of distant boats, and cicadas droned in the trees. Your parents' friends seem nice, I said, though it wasn't entirely true. Eliza snorted. They're sharks in boat shoes. Don't let them fool you. Your mom told me I got the scholarship. She grinned, taking a drag of the cigarette. Told you we'd make it happen. Why me? I asked suddenly. Out of all the people you could have befriended at school, why pick me as your lab partner? Bring me here? Help me get the scholarship? The question had been building for months, and in the darkness, it finally escaped. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had lost its usual sharp edge. Because you're the only person who doesn't want something from me. Everyone else, they see the house, the money, my last name, and they calculate what I can do for them. She flicked ash over the railing. You're different. I thought about the scholarship, the summer invitation, all the ways I had benefited from our friendship, and wondered if that was entirely true. But I wanted it to be, so I nodded in the darkness. Besides, she added, her typical breeziness returning, you're the only one who can explain oxidation-reduction reactions so they make sense. We laughed, and the moment passed. But as I drifted off to sleep that night, Eliza's words echoed in my mind. You're different. I didn't yet understand how that difference was both my value and my danger in their world. Time has a way of burying uncomfortable truths, not destroying them, but layering them over with new experiences until they become fossilized beneath the surface of our lives. For 7 years after that summer at Lake Minnetonka, I carried the word exotic inside me, a small stone I occasionally turned over in moments of self-doubt but mostly ignored as I built a new life. The Lakeside Academy scholarship had changed everything, just as Eliza predicted. From there, I'd earned a full ride to Northwestern, followed by a position at a prestigious marketing firm in Chicago. Eliza and I had remained friends through college, she at Yale, me in Illinois, though our contact grew more sporadic with each passing year. Her parents had remained cordial but distant when we encountered each other at Eliza's graduation, her engagement party, her lavish wedding to a third-generation investment banker named Pierce. I attributed this to their natural reserve, the WASP tendency toward emotional containment that Eliza had once explained to me in anthropological detail. Then came the summer of 2023, 15 years after my first and only visit to Lake Shadows. I was 31, recently promoted to creative director, and in Minneapolis for a client meeting when Eliza texted me. In town for Dad's retirement thing. Drinks tonight? Old times sake? We met at a rooftop bar overlooking the city, Eliza as effortlessly elegant as ever in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She just had her second child, a fact I knew from Instagram rather than direct communication, but looked as though she'd never experienced the physical trauma of childbirth. God, it's good to see you, she said, embracing me with a waft of expensive perfume. How long has it been? 3 years? Your wedding, I think. That disaster. She rolled her eyes, sliding into a booth. Mother's social event of the decade. Pierce and I should have eloped. We ordered drinks and fell into the rhythm of old friends catching up, her children, my recent promotion, mutual acquaintances from high school and college whose lives we followed from a digital distance. It felt surprisingly easy, as though the growing gaps between our communications had never existed. They're selling Lake Shadows, she said suddenly, staring into her martini. Part of Dad's retirement plan. Downsizing to the place in Palm Beach and the apartment in New York. Wow, I said, genuinely surprised. I thought that house would stay in your family forever. So did I. Her perfectly manicured finger traced the rim of her glass. Apparently, the upkeep is prohibitive now that the trust is being restructured. Family politics. Boring. There was nothing boring about it. I could see the pain beneath her casual dismissal. That house had been her heritage, her history, her claim to belonging in a world that valued legacy above all else. I'm sorry, I said. I know how much that place means to you. She shrugged. Times change. Anyway, they're having one last summer gathering next month. A farewell to Lake Shadows. You should come. The invitation caught me off guard. Me? I haven't been there since high school. I know. She leaned forward. That's why you should come. Full circle moment. I hesitated, memories of that summer surfacing, the subtle discomfort beneath the glamour, the sense of being simultaneously welcomed and held at arm's length. I don't know, Eliza. It's been a long time. Please? I need an ally. Pierce is insufferable around my parents' friends, and everyone will be crying into their GNTS about the good old days. She reached for my hand. 2 days. Saturday and Sunday. For me. There was something in her expression, a vulnerability I rarely saw, that made it impossible to refuse. Okay, I said. For you. She beamed. Perfect. I'll email you the details. Later that night, in my hotel room, I wondered why I'd agreed. Nostalgia, perhaps. Or curiosity about whether Lake Shadows would seem as magical through adult eyes. Whatever the reason, I found myself looking forward to seeing the estate one last time before it passed from the Whitmans' hands. I couldn't have known that weekend would destroy not only my memories of the past, but my understanding of my entire relationship with Eliza and her family. Lake Shadows hadn't changed in 15 years. As my rental car crunched up the familiar gravel drive, the gray-shingled mansion came into view, as imposing and timeless as I remembered. The same American flag fluttered from the boathouse. The same Adirondack chairs lined the lawn sloping down to the water. Even Henrik, now stooped and white-haired, appeared at the front door to greet arriving guests. What had changed was me. At 31, I was no longer the awestruck teenager desperate to belong. I had my own achievements, my own world that had nothing to do with the Whitmans or Lake Minnetonka. This realization gave me a confidence I hadn't possessed during my first visit, a confidence that would prove both necessary and insufficient for what was to come. Maya. Eliza called from the porch, waving. She wore white linen shorts and a navy blouse that echoed her mother's style from years ago. You found it. Hard to forget, I said, embracing her. Inside, the great room bustled with guests, some I recognized from Eliza's wedding, others complete strangers. Catherine Whitman, now in her 60s but remarkably preserved, directed staff with the same quiet authority I remembered. Maya, she said when she spotted me, offering her cheek for an air kiss. What a lovely surprise. Eliza didn't mention you were coming. The subtle rebuke to her daughter didn't escape me. Last-minute invitation, I explained. I was in Minneapolis for work. How fortunate, she said with a thin smile. We've put you in the lilac room this time. Henrik will show you up. The lilac room was smaller than the blue room of my teenage visit, tucked at the far end of the house away from the family bedrooms. I unpacked quickly and changed for dinner, wondering at Catherine's reaction to my presence. Had Eliza not told her parents I was coming, Or was this another manifestation of the subtle distance they'd always maintained? Dinner was served on the porch, the long table arranged to showcase the sunset over the lake. I found myself seated between Eliza's cousin Thomas, now balding and working for his father's investment firm, and an elderly woman introduced as Mrs. Cavendish, who had known Eliza's grandmother. Maya Patel, Mrs. Cavendish repeated after our introduction. You were the scholarship girl, weren't you? Catherine's project. I nearly choked on my wine. I'm sorry. The diversity initiative, she continued, oblivious to my discomfort. Catherine was so proud of getting that established at Lakeside. Ahead of her time, really. Before I could respond, Thomas leaned in. Don't mind Mrs. C. She's from a different era. I forced a smile, but the woman's words had reopened a question I'd long suppressed. Had I been nothing more than a project to the Whitmans? A diversity statistic for their philanthropic portfolio? Across the table, Catherine was deep in conversation with a silver-haired man I didn't recognize. As though sensing my attention, she glanced up, her gaze meeting mine for a brief, unsettling moment before she turned away. Later, as guests mingled on the lawn with digestives, I found myself beside the boathouse, seeking a moment of quiet. The vintage boats still gleamed in their slips, lovingly maintained despite the impending sale of the property. They hardly use them anymore, a voice said behind me. I turned to find Mr. Whitman, Robert, standing at the entrance to the boathouse. In 15 years, he'd aged considerably, his once commanding presence diminished by time. Still, there was something formidable in his bearing as he moved to stand beside me. Too much trouble, he continued. Modern families want motorboats, jet skis. No appreciation for craftsmanship. They're beautiful, I said, running a hand along the polished mahogany hull of the nearest Chris-craft. I remember being afraid to touch them when I was here before. He gave me an appraising look. You were a sensible girl. Knew your place. The comment landed like a slap, though his tone held no particular malice. I'm not sure 16-year-olds should have a place, I replied, surprised by my own boldness. Robert Whitman chuckled, a dry sound devoid of humor. Everyone has a place, Miss Patel. The trouble starts when people forget that. He pulled a silver flask from his jacket pocket and took a sip before offering it to me. I declined with a small shake of my head. Eliza tells me you're doing well for yourself in Chicago, he said, returning the flask to his pocket. Creative something or other. Creative director. At Meridian Partners. He nodded absently. Good for you. Always thought you'd make something of yourself, given the opportunity. That's why Catherine pushed so hard for your scholarship, you know. Saw potential. Mrs. Cavendish mentioned something about a diversity initiative, I said carefully. Robert's expression tightened. Marjorie Cavendish should learn to mind her own business. But yes, Catherine was on the board committee for increasing diversity at Lakeside. Your acceptance helped their numbers considerably. I see. The confirmation of what I'd long suspected shouldn't have hurt, but it did. Don't misunderstand, he added, perhaps seeing my expression. You were qualified academically, but there were many qualified applicants. Catherine saw an opportunity to check several boxes at once. I thought of Eliza's words from years ago. You're different. The full meaning of that difference was becoming clearer. And the summer invitation? I asked. Was that part of the diversity initiative too? Robert looked uncomfortable for the first time. That was Eliza's idea. She was always independent-minded, but it worked out. Until... He trailed off, staring at the boats. Until what, Mr. Whitman? Water under the bridge, he said firmly. Ancient history. Before I could press further, Eliza appeared at the boathouse entrance. There you are. Dad, Mother's looking for you. Something about the Prestons' departure tomorrow. Robert nodded, gave me one last inscrutable look, and left without another word. Everything okay? Eliza asked, linking her arm through mine as we walked back toward the house. Fine, I lied. Your dad was just showing me the boats. He loves those things more than his children, she said lightly. Come on, they're setting up the projector in the great room. Dad's idea, home movies from past summers. Mortifying, but mandatory. As we joined the others gathering around a portable screen, I couldn't shake Robert's unfinished thought. It worked out. Until what? What had happened that summer that I couldn't remember? The home movies were mostly from the 1980s and 90s, Eliza and her brother as children, running on the same lawn where we now sat as adults, sailing in the wooden boats, celebrating birthdays on the porch. The gathered guests cooed and laughed at the fashions, the hairstyles, the glimpses of people now gone. Then came footage from 2008, the summer of my visit. My heart quickened as I watched 17-year-old Eliza water skiing, waving at the camera. There I was, standing awkwardly on the dock, wearing a borrowed life jacket. The image was brief, the camera quickly panning to Thomas performing tricks on his new wakeboard. God, look at my hair. Eliza groaned beside me. What was I thinking? I barely heard her, focused on the strange experience of watching my teenage self, thin, reserved, clearly trying to belong, immortalized in the Whitman family archives. There was something poignant about seeing how carefully I stood, how deliberately I smiled, how conscious I was of taking up space in their world. As the footage continued, I noticed something odd. While the camera frequently returned to Eliza, her brother, her cousins, I appeared only in that one brief shot on the dock. Despite having spent 2 full weeks at Lake Shadows, I had been almost entirely edited out of their visual history. The realization sent a chill through me. Had I been so peripheral to their summer that I barely registered? Or had there been a deliberate decision to minimize my presence in their family record? After the movies ended and guests began drifting toward their rooms, I found myself restless, troubled by questions I couldn't articulate. Instead of heading upstairs, I wandered into Robert's study, a wood-paneled room lined with books and hunting trophies that had been strictly off-limits during my teenage visit. The desk was massive, mahogany, probably an antique worth more than my car. On its surface sat a laptop, closed, beside stacks of papers, legal documents related to the sale of the property, I guessed. What caught my eye, however, was a photograph in a silver frame, similar to the one I'd seen in the Blue Room years ago. It showed the same woman from the 1920s photo, but in this image, she stood with a man in tennis whites, both holding rackets. They posed stiffly on what I recognized as the Lake Shadows tennis court, the house visible in the background. Something about the woman's expression, proud, almost defiant, drew me in. My grandmother, Catherine said from the doorway, startling me. Elizabeth Whitman. She was quite the tennis champion in her day. I'm sorry, I said, stepping away from the desk. I was just exploring. Catherine entered the room, closing the door behind her. She wore an elegant navy dress, diamonds glinting at her ears and throat despite the casual setting. Robert's study has always fascinated guests. All those dead animals staring down. I managed to smile. The house is so full of history. It must be difficult to let it go. Some histories should be let go, she said, moving to a cabinet and removing a crystal decanter. Bourbon. I declined again. Catherine poured herself a generous measure and took a seat in one of the leather armchairs, gesturing for me to take the other. I was surprised when Eliza said you were coming this weekend, she said after a sip of bourbon. It's been so long since you've been to Lake Shadows. 15 years, I confirmed. Not since that summer. Catherine nodded slowly. Yes, that summer. Her gaze was evaluating, as though trying to determine how much I knew about something I wasn't sure had happened. Mrs. Whitman. Catherine, please. Catherine, I amended. I've been wondering something. After that summer, why wasn't I invited back? Eliza and I remained friends, but her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. A wariness, a calculation. It wasn't personal, Maya. Circumstances changed. Eliza's social circle expanded at Lakeside. You were focused on your studies. She waved a manicured hand. Life moved on. It was the perfect non-answer, revealing nothing while suggesting the question itself was inappropriate. Classic Catherine Whitman deflection. Mr. Whitman said something earlier about my visit working out until something happened. I pressed. What did he mean? Catherine's smile tightened. Robert has always had a flair for drama. I'm sure he was referring to nothing important. A silence fell between us, heavy with unspoken tensions. Through the window, I could see guests still mingling on the lawn, their figures silhouetted against the moonlit lake. Inside this dark study, however, it felt as though Catherine and I were engaged in a chess match whose rules I didn't fully understand. You've done well for yourself, Maya, she said finally. The scholarship was a good investment. There it was again, the reduction of our relationship to a transaction, a project, an investment. Was that all it was? I asked quietly. A diversity initiative? Catherine's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. You received an excellent education that your mother could never have afforded. I would think gratitude might be more appropriate than these insinuations. Heat rose to my face. I am grateful for the education. I'm just trying to understand. What's to understand? We identified promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds. You qualified. The system worked. She set down her glass with a definitive click. Your continued success is proof of that. And calling me exotic? Was that part of the system too? The words escaped before I could stop them. Catherine's eyes widened slightly, not with shock, but with something closer to recognition. You were different from Eliza's usual friends, she said carefully. That was noteworthy. Because of my race? Catherine stood, smoothing her dress. This conversation is becoming unnecessarily confrontational, Maya. Perhaps it's the late hour. But I remained seated, suddenly unwilling to let this go. 15 years of questions, of subtle exclusions, of wondering why I had been welcomed and then gently but firmly pushed to the periphery of the Whitman's world. It all crystallized in that moment. I'd like to know the truth, I said. About that summer. About why I was never invited back. Catherine looked down at me, her expression unreadable in the dim light of the study. For a long moment, I thought she might simply walk out, ending our conversation with the same practiced dismissal she'd perfected over decades of social navigation. Instead, she moved to the desk and opened a drawer, removing a small leather-bound book. If you want the truth, she said, placing it on the side table beside me, you should read Elizabeth's diary. The relevant entry is marked. With that, she left the room, closing the door behind her with a soft click that somehow felt like the ceiling of a tomb. The diary's leather was soft with age, the pages yellowed and fragile. A ribbon bookmark protruded from about halfway through. With trembling fingers, I opened to the marked page and began to read. August 16th, 1927. R. Insists we continue with the program despite my reservations. 3 girls from the city arrived today, all from good families but in reduced circumstances since the banking crisis. They will work in the house through the month, learning proper domestic management while providing additional help for the summer residents. The youngest, Catherine Miller, shows particular promise. Her features, while common, have a certain appeal, and her manners are adequate. R. believes she would produce acceptable offspring with the right guidance. I remain unconvinced. There is a stubborn streak in her that will not serve the bloodline well. Dr. Hansen arrives tomorrow to begin the assessments. I pray this experiment of RS bears fruit. The board is growing impatient with our failure to produce suitable matches. They speak of more aggressive methods, but I cannot countenance such barbarism. This is a civilized endeavor, after all. We are improving the stock, not breaking horses. Still, I wonder if we are doing the right thing. These girls believe they are here to learn household management, to increase their marriage prospects among the better families. They do not know they themselves are being evaluated for breeding potential. The deception troubles me, though R. insists it is for the greater good. If only there were a better way to ensure the continuation of proper bloodlines without these elaborate charades. I stared at the page, my mind struggling to process what I was reading. This couldn't possibly be related to me, to that summer in 2008. This was from 1927, nearly a century ago. And yet, Catherine had deliberately marked this passage, had given me this diary when I asked about why I wasn't invited back. With growing unease, I turned the page. August 20th, 1927. Dr. Hansen has completed his assessments. Catherine and the Blackwood girl are deemed suitable. The third, Mary Ellis, has been sent home with a story about homesickness. Dr. Hansen found concerning traits in her family history that would make her unsuitable for the program. Tomorrow, Catherine begins her special training with Mrs. Peterson. The girl believes it is deportment lessons for securing a wealthy husband. In truth, it is preparation for her potential role as a vessel for the next generation of Whitman blood. She must learn our ways, our values, our expectations, all without understanding her true purpose. Sometimes I wonder what these girls would do if they knew the truth. Would they run? Or would the promise of wealth, of security, of bearing children with the finest genetic heritage override their moral qualms? I suppose it doesn't matter. The choice is not theirs to make. Some are born to lead, others to serve. Science has merely given us the tools to ensure this natural order continues. My hands shook as I closed the diary. A program? Breeding potential? Vessels for Whitman blood? This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of fictional account, perhaps Elizabeth Whitman's attempt at a Gothic novel. And yet, the clinical detachment of the writing, the matter-of-fact references to actual people and places, it rang with disturbing authenticity. What did this have to do with me? With that summer? With being called exotic? I flipped further through the diary, scanning entries until another marked page caught my eye. this one from much later in the book. October 3rd, 1927. Disaster. The Ellis girl, the one we sent away, has been talking. She claims we are running some kind of eugenics factory at Lake Shadows. Preposterous terminology, of course, but not entirely inaccurate in spirit. R. has dispatched men to handle the situation, but the damage may already be done. The board is furious. All operations are suspended pending review. Catherine and the Blackwood girl have been sent home with generous compensation for their domestic service. They suspect nothing, thankfully. R. insists we can weather this storm. The families involved are too powerful, the subject too delicate for public consumption. He may be right. Already the newspapers have declined to publish the Ellis girls' wild accusations. Money speaks louder than hysterical girls, as always. Still, changes must be made. The program must evolve, become more subtle. No more group selections, no more clinical evaluations. R. speaks of a longer approach, generations rather than months. Infiltration rather than selection. I find I am relieved. This feels more civilized, more in keeping with our station. Let nature take its course, guided by careful hands rather than forced by clinical intervention. The bloodlines will continue. The method merely changes. I close the diary, feeling suddenly cold despite the warm summer night. My mind raced, trying to connect these century-old writings to my own experience at Lake Shadows. Catherine had clearly intended me to draw some parallel. But what? Eugenics. The word hung in my consciousness, ugly and unavoidable. The Whitmans, or at least their ancestors, had been involved in some kind of eugenics program here at Lake Shadows. Not the crude sterilization programs that had stained American history, but something more insidious, selective breeding among the elite, disguised as social opportunity. But that was 1927. Surely such practices hadn't continued into the modern era? Into my era? A knock at the study door startled me from my thoughts. I quickly returned the diary to the desk drawer as Eliza entered, looking flushed from wine and dancing. There you are? I've been looking everywhere. Come on, we're doing night swimming. She paused, studying my face. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, I lied, forcing a smile. Just tired. I think I'll skip the swimming and head to bed. Eliza pouted. Boring, but fine. We'll catch up at breakfast. She gave me a quick hug and disappeared, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and the echo of her carefree laughter. In my room, the lilac room, not the blue room I'd occupied as a teenager, I sat on the edge of the bed, mind whirling. What was Catherine trying to tell me by sharing that diary? Was it a warning? A confession? Some kind of twisted justification? Sleep eluded me as I turned over memories from that summer 15 years ago. Catherine's careful questions about my family history, Robert's clinical assessment of my potential, the way certain guests had studied me with evaluating eyes. Had I been brought to Lake Shadows not just as a diversity statistic for Lakeside Academy, but as a potential candidate for some modern version of their eugenics program? The thought was so absurd, so horrifying that I almost laughed. And yet, hadn't Catherine herself confirmed that I had been selected, evaluated, measured against certain criteria? We identified promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds. You qualified. What exactly had I qualified for? Morning arrived with painful brightness, sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten to curtain in my troubled state. I dressed quickly, hoping to find Catherine before the other guests awoke. I needed answers, clarity about what she'd intended by sharing Elizabeth's diary. But when I reached the dining room, Eliza intercepted me. Mother and Dad had to go into town, she said, pouring coffee. Some last-minute thing with the property lawyers. They left at dawn. Convenient, I thought. When will they be back? Late afternoon, probably. She gave me a curious look. Why? Did you need something from them? Just wanted to thank them for their hospitality, I lied. Well, until they return, you're stuck with me, Eliza grinned. I thought we could take the small boat out, just the two of us. Like old times. The prospect of being alone with Eliza suddenly appealed to me. Perhaps she knew more than she let on about her family's history, about why I had been brought to Lake Shadows all those years ago. An hour later, we were gliding across the lake in the smallest of the vintage Chris-Craft boats, Eliza at the wheel. The day was perfect, blue sky, gentle breeze, the water sparkling like scattered diamonds beneath the morning sun. It was the kind of beauty that demanded acknowledgement, that made dark thoughts seem paranoid and absurd. Remember when Thomas tried to teach you to drive the boat? Eliza called over the engine's purr. And you nearly crashed into the Preston's dock? I did remember the terror of handling something so expensive, Thomas's impatient instructions, Eliza's laughter from the stern. A normal summer memory, unmarred by sinister undertones. That feels like another lifetime, I replied. It was. She cut the engine, letting us drift in a quiet cove I didn't recognize. Sometimes I can't believe we're in our 30s. Real adults with jobs and responsibilities. And children, I added. At least in your case. A shadow crossed her face. Yes, Parker and Lily. She reached for her bag, removing a silver flask similar to her father's. Drink? I know it's early, but it's our last Lake Shadows weekend ever. I declined, watching as she took a long sip. Something was off about Eliza today, a brittleness beneath her usual polished exterior. Can I ask you something? I said after a moment. Always. Why did you really befriend me in high school? The truth. Eliza looked surprised, then thoughtful. That's a strange question after all these years. Humor me. She sighed, setting down the flask. Honestly, at first, it was because my mother suggested it. She was on that diversity committee at Lakeside, and she'd identified you as a potential scholarship recipient. She thought having an in with you would help secure your application. The confirmation stung, even though I'd suspected as much. And later, I pressed. Later, I genuinely liked you. Eliza's gaze met mine, direct and clear. You were smart, driven, didn't care about the stupid social hierarchy that consumed everyone else. It was refreshing. And the summer invitation to Lake Shadows? Her expression shifted subtly. What's this about, Maya? I'm just trying to understand some things. Your mother showed me something last night that's confused me. What did she show you? Eliza's voice had lost its casual tone. A diary. From your great-grandmother Elizabeth. About some kind of program they ran here in the 1920s. Eliza's face drained of color. She turned away, focusing on the distant shore. Mother had no right to share that with you. So you know about it? About what they were doing? It's complicated family history, she said stiffly. Every old family has skeletons. Eugenics isn't just a skeleton, Eliza. It's a horror. It wasn't like that, she snapped. Not like what you're thinking. They weren't Nazis. They were progressive in their way, trying to ensure the best outcomes for future generations. I stared at her, shocked by her defense. By deceiving young women? By treating them as breeding stock? That was a century ago, Maya. Different times, different values. And what about 2008? I asked quietly. Was I brought to Lake Shadows as part of some updated version of the program? Eliza's laugh was too sharp, too sudden. God, no. That's ridiculous. The program ended decades ago. By my parents' generation, it was just family lore, an embarrassing historical footnote. Then why did your mother show me that diary when I asked why I was never invited back? Eliza fell silent, fidgeting with the boat's steering wheel. Finally, she sighed. It's not what you're thinking. Not exactly. Then what is it? You weren't invited back because of what you found, she said slowly. In the boathouse attic. I frowned. I never went to the boathouse attic. You did. Eliza's eyes met mine, searching. Don't you remember? That last day, when everyone went into town for the fireworks, and you said you had a headache so you stayed behind. I did remember staying behind, the blessed quiet of having Lake Shadows to myself for a few hours, the relief of not having to perform social niceties. But the boathouse attic? I stayed in my room, I said. Reading. Eliza shook her head. No. Henrik saw you going into the boathouse. When we all got back, you were different. Quiet. You barely spoke during dinner. The next morning, you couldn't wait to leave. Said your mother needed you home early. A cold sensation spread through my chest. I had left early, had practically begged my mother to come get me a day before scheduled. But I couldn't remember why. That part of the memory was blank. What was in the attic? I asked, my voice barely audible over the gentle lapping of water against the boat. Eliza hesitated. Records. From the program. Photos, documents, medical files. My great-grandfather was meticulous about documentation. And you think I found these records? I know you did. Because after you left, things were missing. A folder of correspondence. Some photographs. She looked away. Mother was furious. She thought you'd stolen them. Might try to expose the family history. I didn't take anything, I said automatically, even as doubt crept in. If I had found such documents, wouldn't I remember? Wouldn't I have done something with the information? Maybe not, Eliza conceded. But you saw enough to understand what my family had been involved in. Mother was convinced you'd either use it against us someday or share it with others. Too much risk. So, no more invitations. I sat back, trying to process this information. A memory loss? Documents about a eugenics program? It sounded like the plot of a bad thriller, not my actual life. This is insane, I said finally. I think I'd remember finding evidence of a eugenics program in your boathouse. Would you? Eliza's voice was oddly gentle. You were 16, Maya. Finding something like that about people you trusted, people who were helping you, it would be traumatic. Sometimes the mind protects itself. Or sometimes people have their memories altered, I said, the words emerging from some deep, alarmed part of my psyche. The bourbon your father offered me at the boathouse yesterday. The drink your mother poured while showing me the diary. The flask you just offered me. What exactly has your family been giving me? Eliza's expression hardened. Now you're being paranoid. Am I? Because none of this makes sense. Why would your mother show me that diary now, after 15 years? Why invite me back at all if she thought I was a threat? Because Lake Shadows is being sold, Eliza said, as though it were obvious. The records, everything in the attic, it's all being destroyed this weekend. Mother wanted closure, I guess. Wanted you to know that whatever you saw back then doesn't matter anymore. It's over. I stared at her. This woman who had been my best friend, who had shaped the trajectory of my life through a scholarship that now felt tainted. Had any of it been real? Our friendship? Her affection? Or had I always been a project, an experiment, a potential threat to be managed? Take me back, I said quietly. I want to go to the boathouse attic. It's empty now, Eliza replied too quickly. Everything's been removed. Then it shouldn't be a problem. Our eyes locked in silent challenge. Finally, Eliza nodded, starting the engine with a sharp tug that sent spray across the bow. Fine, but you won't find what you're looking for. The boathouse attic was accessed via a narrow staircase hidden behind what looked like a storage closet. As we climbed the creaking steps, a sense of déjà vu washed over me. Not quite a memory, but the shadow of one. I've been here before, I murmured, more to myself than to Eliza. I told you, she replied, her voice tight. The attic was exactly as she'd described, empty. No furniture, no boxes, no file cabinets. Just dust motes dancing in the light from a small circular window and bare wooden floors that showed lighter rectangles where items had once stood. See, Eliza said, everything's gone. I moved slowly through the space, trailing my fingers along the exposed rafters. Something about the room felt familiar, like a dream half remembered upon waking. I closed my eyes, trying to access whatever memory might be buried beneath layers of time and, possibly, intentional forgetting. A flash, sunlight through the circular window, falling across rows of filing cabinets. The musty smell of old paper. A photograph of a woman with a clinical chart beside her image, measurements and assessments scrawled in faded ink. There were filing cabinets, I said, opening my eyes. Green metal ones, against that wall. Eliza's expression betrayed nothing. If you say so. Another fragment, a ledger with columns of names, dates, measurements, blood types, genealogical notations stretching back generations. And at the bottom of one page, a familiar name. Patel, I whispered. My father's name was in one of the ledgers. That's impossible, Eliza said sharply. The program ended decades before your father immigrated to the United States. But even as she denied it, I could see the truth in her eyes. Not a continuation of the old program, perhaps, but something evolved from it. Something more modern, more subtle, but rooted in the same eugenics philosophy that had driven Elizabeth Whitman and her husband. What did your parents do? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. What was I really being evaluated for that summer? Eliza's facade finally cracked. She sank down on an overturned crate, shoulders slumping. It wasn't like the old days, she said quietly. No forced matches, no breeding program. Just identification. Tracking. Tracking what? Genetic potential. Mother's diversity initiative at Lakeside was legitimate. She really did want to provide opportunities to talented students from different backgrounds. But there was another layer. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading for understanding. The Whitman Foundation funds genetic research, legitimate, ethical research into hereditary traits that correlate with intelligence, longevity, disease resistance. They needed diverse genetic data points. The implication sank in slowly. I was a data point? Everyone at Lakeside was, she insisted. The entire student body, DNA samples from routine health screenings, academic performance metrics, physical evaluations, and PE classes. All anonymized, all feeding into research databases. That's illegal, I said flatly. And deeply unethical. It's how medical science advances, Eliza countered. How do you think we identify genetic markers for diseases? Track hereditary conditions? Develop personalized medicine? With informed consent, I snapped. Not by secretly harvesting DNA from teenagers. Eliza fell silent, unable to counter this fundamental truth. So I was invited here that summer for what? More samples? More testing. Partially, she admitted. But also because your genetic profile was interesting to them. Your father's lineage combined with your mother's, it created markers they hadn't seen before. They wanted environmental observations, behavioral assessments. Things that couldn't be gleaned from blood samples and academic records. They were studying me, I said, the realization washing over me like ice water. Like a lab specimen. They were studying everyone, Eliza insisted. You weren't special. But even as she said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. They had called me exotic, not as a racial microaggression, but as a clinical assessment. Different. Unique. Genetically interesting. And when I discovered what they were doing, what they had been doing for generations, they decided I was a liability, I said slowly. They cut me off from Lake Shadows, but kept me at Lakeside where they could continue monitoring me. It wasn't personal, Eliza said weakly. It was eugenics, I countered. Dressed up in modern scientific terminology, hidden behind legitimate research, but still fundamentally about identifying superior genetic specimens. Still rooted in the same ugly ideology your great-grandparents embraced. Eliza didn't deny it. We sat in heavy silence, the weight of generations of Whitman family secrets pressing down upon us both. Did you know? I asked finally. When we became friends, when you invited me here, did you know what your parents were doing? She hesitated just long enough for me to see the truth. Not at first, she said. I genuinely liked you. But eventually, yes. Mother explained the family legacy, the importance of the research. She made it sound noble, scientific. By then, our friendship was real. I convinced myself it didn't matter, that the research would help people someday. And calling me your exotic friend? Was that part of the act? Eliza flinched. I never called you that. That was my parents, their generation, their language. Another memory surfaced, Eliza defending me at a party when someone made a comment about my skin color. Her genuine anger, her fierce loyalty. Perhaps not everything had been a lie. What happened that day I supposedly came up here? I asked. The day before I left early? Eliza's gaze dropped to her hands. You found the records. Old ones, new ones. You confronted my parents at dinner after everyone else had gone to bed. There was a horrible argument. You threatened to expose everything, the historical program, the modern research, all of it. And then what? They drugged me? Made me forget? No. Eliza looked horrified. Nothing like that. They reasoned with you. Explained the scientific importance, the potential medical breakthroughs. They offered you a full ride through college, not just high school. A guaranteed path to the future you wanted. They bought my silence, I said flatly. They compensated you for your discretion, she corrected. And you agreed. But you wanted to leave Lake Shadows immediately. Said you couldn't stay under the same roof knowing what you knew. I frowned, trying to reconcile this story with my complete lack of memory of the incident. And you expect me to believe I just forgot this entire confrontation? The records? The hush money? People compartmentalize trauma, Maya. And you had every reason to suppress it. The scholarship changed your life. Got you into Northwestern, launched your career. Would acknowledging how it came about have served any purpose? It sounded plausible. Too plausible, perhaps. A convenient explanation for gaps in my memory that might have other causes, like whatever might have been in the drinks I'd been offered since arriving. If that's true, why did your mother show me the diary? Why risk reminding me of what I supposedly agreed to forget? Eliza sighed. Because everything's changing now. Lake Shadows is being sold. The Foundation's research has shifted to clinical trials based on the data already collected. The old records are being destroyed. Mother thought, closure might be good. For everyone. Closure, I repeated. Or confirmation that I still don't remember what happened? Before Eliza could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs below. Catherine appeared in the attic doorway, her expression tightening when she saw us. I see you two have been catching up, she said, her voice cold. Eliza, your father needs help with the Preston's luggage. It was a dismissal, not a request. Eliza hesitated, looking between her mother and me. before nodding and moving toward the stairs. As she passed Catherine, something unspoken passed between them, a warning, perhaps, or a reminder. When we were alone, Catherine moved further into the attic, surveying the empty space with an air of satisfaction. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. "I don't know what I'm looking for," I admitted. "Eliza says I discovered something here 15 years ago. Something about your family's involvement in eugenics research. She says I confronted you, that you paid for my silence with a college scholarship." Catherine's expression revealed nothing. "And you don't remember this confrontation?" "No. Which makes me wonder what was in the bourbon your husband offered me yesterday, or the drink you poured while showing me Elizabeth's diary." A thin smile crossed Catherine's face. "You always were clever, Maya. Too clever, perhaps, for your own good. What did you give me?" "Nothing harmful," she said dismissively. "A mild sedative. Something to help you relax, to make our conversation less confrontational than it might otherwise have been." "You drugged me." The confirmation should have shocked me more than it did. "I facilitated a difficult conversation," she corrected. "Just as I did 15 years ago." So it was true. I had discovered something in this attic, had confronted them. And they had. What? Drugged me then too? Manipulated me into accepting their terms while under the influence of nothing harmful? Why bring me back now? I asked. Why risk me remembering? Catherine moved to the circular window, looking out over the lake. Because I believe in tying up loose ends, Maya. Lake Shadows has been in our family for over a century. Its secrets should remain here when we leave. The research program, is it really over? That phase is complete, she said carefully. The data collection, the observation. We have what we need. For what? She turned to face me, her expression suddenly earnest. For the next great leap in human evolution. Targeted genetic therapies that could eliminate hereditary diseases, extend human lifespan, enhance cognitive function. The Foundation's research is on the verge of breakthroughs that will change medicine forever. Built on data collected without consent, I pointed out. From children. Built on decades of careful observation and documentation, she countered. What my grandparents began as a crude attempt at selective breeding has evolved into sophisticated genetic science. The methods have changed. The goal remains the same, human improvement. Eugenics by another name. Catherine sighed, as though disappointed by my inability to grasp a simple concept. You benefited from our interest, Maya. The scholarship, the opportunities, the doors opened for you, all because we recognized your potential. My genetic potential, I clarified. Not my humanity. The two are inseparable, she said with genuine conviction. What are we if not the expression of our genes? In that moment, I saw Catherine Whitman clearly for perhaps the first time, a woman so steeped in generational privilege and scientific rationalization that she couldn't recognize the fundamental moral failure at the heart of her family's legacy. To her, the diary I'd read wasn't a horror story of deception and exploitation. It was a scientific origin story, the primitive beginnings of important research. What happens now? I asked. You've brought me back. Show me the diary, confirmed that your family has been conducting unethical genetic research for generations. What did you expect me to do with this information? Catherine moved closer, her expression softening into something almost motherly. I expected you to understand that some secrets serve a greater purpose. That the past, both the distant past and your own, is better left undisturbed. You want my continued silence. I want your continued cooperation, she corrected. The Meridian Partners agency where you work, they handle pharmaceutical clients, do they not? The connection clicked into place. The Whitman Foundation is launching a pharmaceutical division. Catherine nodded. Clinical trials begin next year. Gene therapies based on our research. We'll need a marketing partner who understands the significance of the work, who can position it appropriately for public consumption. You want me to help sell eugenics to the public, I said incredulously. I want you to help bring life-saving therapies to people who need them, she countered. To be part of something transformative. And if I refuse? If I expose what your family has been doing? Catherine's smile didn't waver. On what evidence? Elizabeth's century-old diary? The rambling accusations of a woman who can't even remember discovering the supposed evidence she claims exists. She was right, and we both knew it. I had no proof, no documentation, nothing but fragmented memories and a story so outlandish it would destroy my credibility rather than the Whitmans. Besides, Catherine continued, exposure would hurt you as much as us. Your entire career is built on opportunities we provided. How would it look if people learned your education was effectively purchased as part of a confidentiality agreement? That you knowingly accepted benefits derived from research you now claim is unethical? The trap was perfect, constructed over decades. Whether I remembered agreeing to their terms or not, I had accepted their money, built my life on their foundation. I was complicit, if only through silence and benefit. Think about it, Catherine said, moving toward the stairs. The choice isn't really about the past anymore. It's about the future. Your future. A partnership with the foundation would transform your career. She left me alone in the empty attic, the dust motes swirling in the shaft of sunlight from the small round window. In the distance, I could hear the sounds of guests departing, car doors slamming, farewells being called across the lawn. I stood in the space where I had apparently discovered the truth 15 years earlier, trying to reconcile the fragments of memory that had begun to surface. Had I really confronted the Whitmans about their research? Had I accepted their terms, their money, their silence? Or had that version of events been planted in my mind yesterday, alongside Elizabeth's diary entries? Whatever the truth, the result was the same. I was bound to the Whitman legacy through my own life's trajectory. Every achievement, every opportunity, every door that had opened for me, all could be traced back to that summer, to being selected as genetically exotic and interesting enough to study. The realization was a prison whose bars I had helped construct with every step I'd taken since age 16. 3 months after the final weekend at Lake Shadows, I sat in a sleek conference room in downtown Chicago, watching as the Whitman Foundation's representatives presented their proposal to Meridian Partners. Their new pharmaceutical division was preparing to launch clinical trials for gene therapies targeting early-onset Alzheimer's, and they wanted our agency to handle the marketing campaign. This could revolutionize treatment, the lead scientist was saying, her voice earnest behind her designer glasses. Not just managing symptoms, but actually preventing the disease from developing in genetically predisposed individuals. Around the table, my colleagues nodded appreciatively. The potential account was huge, not just financially lucrative but prestigious, the kind that won awards and established agencies as industry leaders. My phone vibrated silently on the table. A text from Eliza. Did they make their pitch yet? Mother says you'll be the lead on the account. Catherine Whitman's confidence was not misplaced. The decision had effectively been made before the meeting even began. Our CEO had been thoroughly charmed during preliminary discussions, and the Foundation's reputation for cutting-edge research made them an attractive client. What no one in the room knew, what no one could know, was the true source of the data that had enabled these breakthrough therapies. Years of unauthorized genetic sampling from unsuspecting students. Generations of manipulated social connections and relationships designed to observe genetic expression in controlled environments. A century of eugenics philosophy repackaged as modern medical research. And me, the exotic specimen who had proven genetically interesting enough to study, but dangerous enough to manage through carefully constructed opportunities and selective memory modification. After the Lake Shadows weekend, I'd had my blood tested for sedatives, had scoured medical journals for information on drugs that could affect memory formation. I'd found enough to convince me that Catherine's nothing harmful had likely been something that impaired my ability to form lasting memories of traumatic events, both 15 years ago and during my recent visit. The fragments I'd recovered in the boathouse attic were real memories, I believed, but incomplete. Eliza's story about my discovery and confrontation was plausible, aligned with what I could remember. But the details remained frustratingly out of reach, like trying to recall a dream that dissolves upon waking. Maya will be taking the lead on this account, my boss announced, pulling me back to the present moment. Her background in pharmaceutical marketing makes her the perfect choice. The Foundation representative smiled at me, professional, collegial smiles that revealed nothing about whether they knew who I was, what I represented in their decades-long research project. Did the scientists even know where their data had come from? Or were they too compartmentalized from the full truth? I look forward to working with you all, I said, the words emerging automatically as my mind raced with alternatives, possibilities, escape routes. I could refuse the account, claim a conflict of interest, walk away from Meridian Partners entirely. But then what? Start over at 40? With what resources? And even if I did, the Whitmans would always be there, my academic records, my professional references, the very foundation of my adult identity all tied to their influence. I could try to expose them, go to journalists, regulatory agencies, ethics boards. But with what proof? Catherine had been right about that. I had nothing concrete, only fragments of memories that even I wasn't certain were reliable. Or I could accept the reality of my situation, take the account, excel at it as I had excelled at everything they had guided me toward. Use my position to ensure, at minimum, that the gene therapies were ethically deployed going forward, whatever their origins. As the meeting wrapped, polite applause echoed off the sleek glass walls. Business cards were exchanged, handshakes offered. Somewhere outside, the city pulsed in its usual rhythm, unaware, uncaring, unstoppable. But inside me, something cracked. I stepped out of the boardroom, the cool hallway air doing nothing to quiet the hum in my chest. At the far end, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the skyline. Below, streets wound like capillaries through the heart of Chicago. I could almost trace my path from scholarship kid to creative director, from girl with a borrowed dress at someone else's dinner table to woman at the head of one. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Eliza. "We did it," smiley face. "Drink soon." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked past my office, down the elevator, and into the street. The sunlight was too bright. Or maybe it was just that everything felt false now. Every brick of success laid with stolen mortar. They built me, hadn't they? Curated my rise. Told themselves they were helping. That I was grateful. That I'd forget. And they weren't wrong. I had. Until they reminded me. Until they dared me to remember and banked on the idea I wouldn't do anything with it. Not because I was weak, but because they'd made me dependent. On reputation. On status. On a future they engineered. I walked until I reached a bookstore I hadn't visited in years. It was a small, independent place tucked between two gleaming towers of capitalism, an old ghost refusing to be evicted. Inside, I asked the clerk for a copy of Medical Ethics and Genetic Consent, Case Studies in Contemporary Bioresearch. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop. Not to write an exposé. Not yet. I wasn't foolish enough to believe I could take the Whitmans down with a medium post and a righteous heart. But I began a folder. Lake Shadow's Archive. Do not delete. Inside, I placed everything I remembered, everything I suspected, everything I had managed to confirm. I typed out Catherine's words. Eliza's slips. Scanned the DNA testing results I'd run on myself after the weekend. Cross-referenced names from Elizabeth Whitman's diary with old Lakeside Academy donor rosters. And then I backed it all up twice. When it was done, I sat back and stared at the screen. I wasn't going to quit my job. Not yet. I would lead the campaign. I would shape the narrative. But not as their pawn. Not anymore. I would watch. And record. And wait. For the moment when the truth could hurt them more than it would hurt me. Because that moment always comes. Not in dramatic confessions or late-night exposés. But in quiet choices made over time. In strategic silences. In what we choose to build, and what we quietly, methodically prepare to destroy. 6 months later, I received a manila envelope at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a black and white photograph, a group of girls standing in front of the boathouse at Lake Shadows, circa 1930. One of them had been circled in red ink. On the back, a name had been written in blocky, faded pen. Catherine Miller. Below it, in a sharper, fresher hand. Not the first. Not the last. Not the only one who remembers. I didn't know who sent it, but I understood the message. I wasn't alone. And the Whitmans? They weren't just selling pharmaceuticals. They were building something. Still, only now, I wasn't on the outside looking in. I was inside the machine. And machines can be rewired. Or dismantled. Quietly. One screw at a time.